Gates. He is scheduled to speak at this event recognizing the importance of federal funding for colleges and universities.
We were talking about who should be the keynote speaker at the 150th anniversary celebration of the Morrill Act. We immediately agreed on a first choice, Bill Gates. Someone who would not only help us recognize and celebrate the last 150 years, but challenge us and work with us in the decades ahead. Together with his wife, Bill co-chairs the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which works to expand opportunities for people around the world. Their foundation is a leader in efforts to improve global health, alleviate poverty, and expand opportunities for women, and with particular significance today, increase access to and success in education. Their efforts, which span the globe, are unprecedented and truly exciting. The work of the Gates Foundation is built on a simple premise, that all lives have equal value. That powerful statement resonates with all of us. And it is rooted in the same philosophy as the act we're celebrating today, which has extended educational and economic opportunity to millions. The Gates Foundation is involved in many of the same endeavors that today's land-grant universities are. In particular, improving educational outcomes, expanding access across our country, but also in addressing some of the grand challenges globally, such as eradicating disease, ensuring food security, and developing new sources of sustainable energy. Through not only its funding, but also its thoughtful approach to philanthropy, the Gates Foundation is a valued partner of American universities and others committed to improving the human condition. We could not have a more committed and passionate ally in these pursuits. I know all of us respect and admire greatly what Bill Gates has devoted his wealth and his life to, and we're delighted to welcome him to this celebration. Join me in welcoming Bill Gates.
Well, thank you, President Milken. I'm grateful for your invitation to address the APLU on this special day. And to express my gratitude, I brought this bag with me. Now, this bag is actually helping lift 10 million people out of poverty. Farmers in Central and West Africa grow black-eyed peas. They're hardy, they're protein-rich, but unfortunately, tiny pests called weevils destroy half the crop after it's harvested during the time it's stored. Or they did until researchers at Purdue University developed this 3-layered polyethylene and nylon bag. It costs less than $2, and it keeps out the weevils, and it increases poor farm families' incomes by over 25%. So that bag is a good example of one of the many partnerships our foundation has with APLU members across the country. American public colleges and universities do the finest research in the world. You create knowledge not just for its own sake, but to improve people's lives. And on behalf of our foundation, I want to thank you for that. Today, though, I want to focus on the one thing you do that's even more important than that research, and that's providing great education to almost 5 million students. The Morrill Act created a system of public colleges to, quote, promote the liberal and practical education of the industrial classes. There were 2 breakthrough ideas contained in that single sentence. First, that higher education should be both liberal and practical, that it should address society's needs, and second, that all people should have the opportunity to obtain it. These 2 ideas amounted to a brand new vision for higher education, based on the conviction that a bigger and more diverse group of well-educated people would be an asset to our democracy and a boon to our economy. This vision powered America's economic dynamism for more than a century. Your graduates helped build a prosperous country. Recently, though, education advocates have been looking at the international competitors. And what we see there is that other countries have seen what the U.S. did well, that we built a system of great colleges, and in many respects, they are copying what we did. And in some respects, on areas like completion rate, some of those countries are doing even better than we've done. And so what that says to me is that we need to double down. We need to take this phenomenal asset that's benefited the world and make it even better. There should be no doubt about our starting point. We are still by far, when it comes to research, teaching, and learning at top universities, the very best in the world. However, two major trends in higher education are guiding us down a path that may lead us away from the historical commitment to equity and opportunity. First, there's the financial constraints. In the past generation, state funding per full-time student has fallen by 25%. I don't need to tell you that. This is something that you face every day. The fiscal crisis has accelerated this trend. In just the past 5 years, for example, my home state of Washington has cut funding for higher education by 17%. As a result of this disinvestment and the steadily rising costs of running your institutions, the financial burden of college has been shifting to students. They now pay an average of $45,000 out of pocket for 4 years of public school. Now, federal money has helped bridge the gap for a while. The federal spending on higher education has gone up quite a bit, one of the faster growing items in the budget. The stimulus package helped the state budgets for a couple of years, but now those dollars have largely come to an end. The Pell program alone more than doubled in the past decade. But unfortunately, it's unlikely to continue that path. It's not on a sustainable trend. In fact, if we look out to 2014, there's an $8 billion funding gap just for the Pell program alone. So that's one trend that's troubling. A second trend that's troubling is the sort of trap of moving towards higher and higher status or exclusivity. When U.S. News rankings come out, they judge you essentially on how selective you are, more by the inputs coming into the institution. They look at credentialed faculty, the amount you spend on various things, and sort of subjective impressions of academic reputation. And so these measures are standing in the way of having real measures of value added, real measures of effectiveness that we really need to root out what best practices are and continue to benefit from the best work that all of you do. I understand these perverse incentives are hard to get around, but in a sense it's a type of zero-sum competition in exclusivity. One symptom of this we see is that acceptance rates at many flagship universities now hover at around 50%. And that doesn't count a large number of students who don't even bother applying because they know that the bar for admission has continued to go up and up. And so in short, fewer people of those who want to attend your universities are getting in, and those who do get in are paying more. And so this is a big challenge. It can't continue if we all have a goal of fulfilling that mission of providing broad education. And so we have to look at how we can reverse both spirals. We have to let in as many people as can be successfully educated, and they have to get that education at the lowest possible cost. Private universities can boast about their selectivity if they choose to do so. But as public institutions, your prestige comes from a commitment to equity, opportunity, and excellence. And so, it is not a point of high status to keep students out, but rather it's high status letting them in, and even taking students who haven't had the greatest high school education, who don't have the highest SAT scores, and giving them a high quality education. And so today is a great day to pause and look to this group for leadership. You can steer your universities out of these trends by making innovation a priority for the sector you lead. 150 years ago, your predecessors started a new conversation about the purpose of higher education. You can start the conversation now about the changes required to keep on serving that purpose. For example, we can move beyond the question, how can we get a lot more public funds? Unfortunately, in the reasonably near term, there won't be much additional money. The rising share of both state and federal budgets committed to health care, broadly defined, leaves very little room for flexibility. The mathematics are quite brutal. And whether there is more money or less money in the long term, we should also focus on the challenge of figuring out how to use it best, particularly the money devoted to financial aid. How do we take it and get better results for students? I think there are two principles worth keeping in mind. The first is that aid should be structured to provide incentives for both institutions and students. Incentives to raise completion rates, incentives to raise income and employment of the graduates. If we look just at completion rates, the 6-year graduation rate for APL institutions is just over 60%, and the 4-year rate is a little bit less than 40%. Now, behind those statistics are a lot of stories of students who aren't succeeding, who end up with a lot of debt. Tracking those students, understanding what's going on to them should be more important. Perhaps aid should somehow be tied to institutional practices that create this strong incentive to adopt the practices that have been seen at the best institutions to boost graduation rates. What if students felt that financial incentive to reach important milestones on the path to graduation? We really can't be agnostic about whether aid subsidizes failure or success. The goal is success, a degree in the shortest reasonable time for every student who puts in the necessary work, without just creaming the most prepared students and without sacrificing quality. Policymakers are starting to look at what some of these incentives for completion might look like. I hope you'll join them. You and your students will have to live with policy changes that are coming, and those changes will be more effective if you contribute your expertise early in the process. A second principle I think is valuable for reforming financial aid is to make need-based aid a priority again. In the past 30 years, the percentage of aid money going to students without demonstrated financial need has tripled. This is somewhat a consequence of the upward status spiral. Giving the top student scholarships is a great way of persuading them not to pick another institution. But it also means that money is being spent on students who may actually need the least help. Colleges add the most value when students who are less prepared lead with the same knowledge and skills that other graduates possess. So reserving your aid money for students who need it also serves your economic mission. Educating a student who might not otherwise go to college generates a much higher return on public investment than defraying the cost of an education a student might have paid for themselves. We also have to engage in a new conversation about the role of technology. After all, technology's come a long ways. It's far easier now to store video lectures online. It's essentially free to do it. There are tools now that let us build wonderful interactive courses. Students, of course, are more accepting of this, of being part of their educational experience. In fact, in some cases, their demands are getting ahead of the supply of these things. So how do we use technology? In a variety of ways to augment the education we're providing. Technology may serve to help us both in terms of efficiency and in terms of quality. Technology should be re-examined to look at the whole college experience. How do we track whether a student is coming to lectures and immediately engage them and understand what's going on with them? That's an area where actually the for-profit sector does some things that are very interesting. We've seen technology enablement come into several different areas for the universities that are piloting these things. Adaptive software can personalize education so students spend more time on the concepts they're struggling with. Hybrid models of instruction improve the quality of collaboration between students and teachers. And simulation and gaming can engage students in creative and applied ways. But these innovations are largely still at the pilot stage, and it will take leadership to move them beyond that. Once it's taken to scale, technology can change the financial calculus and give more students an opportunity to earn a degree. There are some interesting models to build on. Austin Peay State University in Tennessee recently created an e-advisor system called Degree Compass. It gives students a suggested list of courses by looking at their transcripts and looking at data from hundreds of thousands of previous students. It's almost like the way Netflix suggests movies, but instead of just suggesting classes students will enjoy, it suggests those that they'll be able to handle and help them, that will help them get to their degree requirements. Across the United States, the average student graduates with 20% more credits than necessary. Now, in some cases, this is fine. It's simply them seeking to broaden their educational experience, but in many cases, it's because the courses are not available or they didn't have advice about what would be best. And so applications like Degree Compass can address these issues and do it in a way that's very straightforward for the institution. The early results at Austin Peay have been promising. Students do half a letter grade better in classes suggested by Degree Compass than in classes they pick the old-fashioned way. And similar systems in other universities have improved retention rates by more than 5%. Educational technology will probably have its greatest impact in terms of the learning itself. A great example of this is Arizona State University recently designed its introductory math course taken by 8,000 freshmen, many of whom came in with a very poor preparation, not ready to do college-level work when they enroll. Instead of lectures, they developed hybrid classes. The students are given a piece of adaptive computer software that looks at where they are, understands exactly what they've learned well and what they haven't, and it focuses the students on the knowledge they don't have. It gives reports to the professor so they can work with students in small groups. They can organize groups that need help on a concept. They can organize groups for peer learning that turns out to be very powerful. And the results in this are very impressive. They've taken a course, this first math course, that is often the very worst experience and has terrible completion rates, and raised those completion rates by 17% while cutting costs by a third. And a large number of students were able to finish weeks before the end of the term, and so get their math knowledge up to par and still have time to devote to their other classes. And certainly in areas like remedial math, I believe the future of education looks more like the course delivered there than it does like the traditional course delivery. The whole area of so-called MOOCs, massively open online courses, is receiving a lot of attention now. In some ways, you might say, well, what's really new here? We've had video courses online like OpenCourseWare for a long time. We've had interactive courses like Carnegie Mellon, Open Learning Institute. So, is there some breakthrough? The answer is, in a technology sense, there really isn't some dramatic breakthrough. But what's being done that I think is very exciting is they're taking three elements. Really great video lectures with the interactivity built into those lectures. So at 10-minute intervals, you're tested on the concepts and you cement those. So that's the beauty of great video lectures together with the interactivity. The third thing they do is they get a lot of people, often as many as 100,000, taking the course at the same time. And so they have lots of peer education going on where people are answering questions, looking at each other's homework, giving advice, and then the teaching staff is merely reviewing all of that activity to make sure that it's high quality, that students aren't being misled. A fourth piece is probably more challenging, how does this connect up to degrees or accreditation that employers will value? They are giving out certificates, but not fully endorsed degrees. And so that's an area where there will definitely be some evolution. But this is a very important movement. You all need to try it out, think about how your institutions should get involved. It's edX and Coursera are two leaders in this. Coursera's got over 40 courses from University of Michigan. It's got courses from Penn, Princeton, Stanford. And the courses themselves are free to everyone. You only pay to get the actual certificate. And theoretically, these courses can serve millions of people. And so it has a real opportunity to let us step back and think about who are the best lecturers and what can we do with interactivity and how do we need to supplement that with face-to-face study groups, hands-on laboratories. What are the skill sets that you really want to pull in for a hybrid type model? I know some critics worry about the loss of personal interaction that certainly is central to a high-quality education. But this technology, when it's well conceived, actually can be used to strengthen those interactions. As the Arizona State math course shows, technology can free up time and allow the professionals to really be working with the students who need that help in a more direct way. And so these MOOCs, I think, really do represent something important that we all have to contribute to and think about what their role should be. So the field, in some ways, is in its infancy. We need to look at different types of students, particularly students who are not well motivated. We can say that definitely that original group who signed up for a machine learning course, that was not your average student. Those were some highly motivated people. And so that's where I think the hybrid blend really has to come in. Technology can't do everything, but for schools that want to be at the cutting edge, experiment in this field is very, very important. When we look at the number of students being educated, your institution have grown at 2% a year. So it's interesting to ask, would advances in use of technology allow you to grow even more and serve more students? Well, for 150 years, higher education has been an incredible source of strength for our country. And there's no group of institutions that show that better than the ones represented here. Our nation has done better at sending lots of young kids to college than any other. And your institutions have shown that equity and opportunity don't need to compromise excellence. If the nation had chartered a different course 150 years ago and education had continued to be reserved for the select few, there's no doubt that we'd be less competitive today. Instead, we decided to build something new and better, and we created these universities that are the envy of the world. That is why young people keep applying in ever greater numbers. And that's why they're willing to take on tens of thousands of dollars of debt to get a degree. But because they know that the education you provide is the key to the future they want so badly, they know you can make their dreams come true. But we face a huge challenge, just like we did in 1862. How do we cope with these budget constraints without sacrificing the quality on which society relies? Can we be innovative and effective with the most challenged students as we are with the most prepared ones? And can we apply resources in new ways so that we can serve everyone who wants access? Asking and answering these hard questions is the key to building on the legacy that you inherited and that you now hold. I believe it's key to the future of our country. I have great optimism that you will once again summon your ability to innovate, that you will see clearly where higher education needs to go, and then lead us all there. Thank you.
Okay, well, I told you he'd challenge us. So now we get a chance to challenge him a bit. So we're going to open up for questions. I know there are some people in the audience that are chomping at the bit, but I'm having trouble seeing everyone. Somebody, I don't know where the microphones are. I'm assuming you'll get to someone with a question. Well, all right, I'm going to ask the first question while while you're figuring out the logistics. So one of the issues that some of our institutions have, Bill, is that young people are coming out of high school unprepared for college work. They have to take remediation, developmental education. Your foundation supports work in that area. It's something you're very interested in, and I wonder if you could share with us what you found to be the most promising.
Well, definitely the boundary between high school and higher education is really not well handled today. If you're a student in high school, you ought to be able to go online and have some free assessment of your, say, math capability. You should never have to go in and should take the qualifying exam, which is generally an Accuplace or Compass exam, and get surprised by the result you get. And it's really disheartening for that student because they just get a number. They don't get told, well, you know, you need to work on fractions, you need to work on scientific notation. They just get this number, and then they go into a remedial course where they sit there and they're not sure every day they're in the lecture, well, is this the part I already understand, or is this the part that I completely messed up? And 70% of those kids who go to that remedial math class never get a degree. So it's just bad in every way. The ideal is to have the set of knowledge that we expect you to have in math, say algebra, to have that be well understood. And there's the so-called Common Core effort that's been adopted by 46 states that will lead to that math in the country is the same. You can have different textbooks, different ways of teaching it, but the core concepts are the same. And the online material, like KhanAcademy.com, actually has adopted to this Common Core very quickly. Over the period of the next few years, the different states are getting their textbooks and teacher training into that. And that'll be coupled with these free online exams that you can try your knowledge out and be pointed to various material, either by yourself or with a teacher or some type of coach that'll help you get there. And so we hope to take this huge disconnect that puts huge costs on the higher education system to make it kind of clean up these problems and have it be a lot more open about what's going on and, you know, a lot more efficient, a lot more positive for that student. So that's a boundary both in reading and writing and math that has been very, very problematic, particularly for kids coming out of inner city high schools.
Thank you. Question? Okay. Well, whoever gets the mic first gets to go.
Mr. Gates, thank you so much for being here. I'm Randy Woodson. I'm the chancellor at North Carolina State University. Throughout your career, and particularly in recent years, you've visited many college campuses, and I know you get a charge out of interacting with our students. Tell us what you think the challenges and opportunities are for students these days.
Well, it's interesting to talk to kids about how did they pick an institution and how clear were they about their goals as they were going into the institution. There's a big difference between kids who have a career goal and ones who don't. It's fascinating to talk to them about how much do you work during school, how are you thinking about this debt that you're building up over time. What do you think about the quality of your teachers? Do you give feedback to people about the different experiences you're having? One thing I've always been interested in are the kids who don't complete. The fact that even in these very top institutions, 6 years later 40% haven't completed. It's surprisingly high, higher than if you'd asked me before I saw the statistic what that number would be. And so sitting down and talking to them, where did you feel like you got lost? And what kind of intervention would have made a difference to you to be able to stay in? Was it mostly financial? Were you discouraged about your ability? Why did that go off track? Clearly there's a lot of amazing professors who reach out and get engaged with students. It's always wonderful to hear about that. And it makes you think, okay, if that's a best practice, is that measured? Is that rewarded? How would that spread out to other universities? It's always impressive to me the energy these students put in to get an education. It's this leap of faith, of course, that you're going to spend this 4 years, and that's going to do something great for you. But you look at those application rates that are even stronger today. I mean, the economy, if anything, meant more people wanted to have that credential. It's phenomenal. On the side as an employer, for Microsoft, we went to the elite institutions and we took, to the degree we could, hired the very best students. And we were quite picky about where we went to hire and exactly what courses we thought they should have taken. And so we were expecting the universities. We weren't considering ourselves the ones who would fix some lack of education. We were going to pick the people who were already very well prepared, and so it was definitely on the institutional's hands to give somebody those skills.
You mentioned something that I think is important, and we're all very interested in increasing graduation rates in this country, and that is a goal that every institution in this room shares. One of the things that APLU is working on now, which I think is going to be a very important tool for policymakers, is a different way of looking at graduation rates. Because right now we don't capture those students who transfer and then graduate from another institution, which is a significant number in American higher education. So there are a number of elements like that where we can add to the data available, which I think will help us understand better the path for college students in America. Another question. Yes, please.
Yes.
Oh.
Good morning, Mr. Gates. My name is Wadet Cruzado. I'm president of Montana State University. Thanks for your message this morning. You shared with us some exciting ideas. Do you have any additional exciting ways in which technology can be enhanced in higher education? And also, what is your advice to institutions who want to lead in this area, especially in the current budget environment?
Well, there's no doubt that these technology enablement should be able to help with budget constraints. For example, if you take the lectures of your big courses and you choose to put them entirely online, that is not to have a physical get-together, then in many cases that takes what the key enrollment limit is for those courses and it gets rid of it. It's the size of that lecture hall in many, many cases. And if you actually have feedback systems where you take the study groups that are, often those are grad students or adjuncts or people in those, and really helps you understand who's doing a good job in those things. And you have a review system that rewards excellence in those roles, then that is the real thing that drives the quality, are the people in those study sections. And so there's kind of an irony right now that that large lecture, which technology can provide something that is better because you're using a world-class lecturer, it's interactive in a way that you're not having to go, 30, 60 minutes without sitting and practicing the knowledge that you're gaining. And there's clear proven evidence that stopping and doing that interacting really improves the retention and understanding of the material. I think that's sitting there, and why isn't it being grabbed onto? Well, I think it's that the financial pressure just hasn't been strong enough for some institutions to take that leap. It may be that the teachers don't want to do it, but that's just, sitting out there as a very, very clear thing, and, hardly adopted at this stage whatsoever. And so, that's partly why we're at the beginning, because it's only as you get that type of adoption and use in a hybrid mode. If we don't get the hybrid mode, what we're going to get is eventually a system of accreditation that has the same prestige as college degrees will arise, which is independent of how you learn the knowledge. That is, there'll be people who certify that you have the equivalent of a four-year degree, so that employers will trust that just as much. And that will have a lot of people experimenting how they can prepare people for that, but they won't be bundled together the way that education and the degree are right now. And so there'll be this system that grows up outside of traditional education, particularly to the degree that these online things aren't adopted within the mainstream education.
Okay, if you can, who has a microphone? There you go.
Jimmy Cheek, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, Chancellor. We're delighted you're here today. Your foundation does many great things. In looking at your foundation at the post-secondary level, though, it looks like you focus on community colleges for funding, and I was wondering if you would explain why you're doing that.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Other than our scholarship program, the Gates Millennium Scholarship Program, which actually ends up sending kids primarily to four-year colleges and very high-quality four-year colleges like this one, a lot of the rest of what we've done has been focused on community college. I think that most of what we're doing there in terms of how you track students and help intervene as students are having problems, redesigning the remedial math and reading and writing courses, I think a lot of that has applicability to all colleges. But when we look at where low-income students end up going in this country, it's overwhelmingly to community colleges. Now, fortunately, many of those students, if they do well after 2 years, then they show up in your institutions. And there's some selection bias there, because those students actually tend to have a better completion rate if they've gone through and done that. They tend to have a somewhat better completion rate than people who come to you in the first year. And so it's a very attractive cohort. It's a cohort we should all want to grow, because in terms of educational dollars spent, they're actually getting a four-year degree for lower cost than people who take another path through the system. So we saw that there was less philanthropic money involved with community colleges, less attention. There was more use of adjunct professors. There was more of a need for student tracking, more of a need for actual measurement of who the good professors were and create a professional system around that. And also there was an ability to, when you have adjuncts, I know there's lots of challenges with that, but it's actually a system that if you have a quality measure, you can very immediately decide who to give bonuses to, who to bring back, and who not to bring back. And so, the payback on quality understanding is very, very high. Whereas if you put that into another system, what are you going to do with the data that comes out of it? So, we wish we could work on both, and we hope our stuff has broad application. But I'd say it's been probably 3/4 more focused on community college. Now, as we're getting involved in issues like what should Pell policy be, and how should that encourage excellence and completion rates, now, in those areas, are all the different loan type policies. That obviously touches the whole system. And we're quite worried that if the amount of federal money for education shrinks, that a lot of people talk about that happening. Will that be done in an intelligent, can we minimize the amount that happens? And to the degree it happens, can we make sure it's done in the most effective way?
Okay. Microphone? Yeah, great.
Mr. Gates, Dwayne Nellis, I'm president of the University of Idaho, and it's a real pleasure to have you here today. One of the concerns that I have, and I know a number of my colleagues have, is that the number of young people that are tracking into STEM disciplines, and it goes beyond preparation. It's getting them excited about science, technology, engineering, and math. And we're losing ground globally in this context. I'd just like you to comment a little bit about how we can work more effectively, starting even at the middle school level and high school, as universities, to try to stimulate a more effective pipeline for these students into our universities.
Yeah, it is a fairly stunning fact that all the rich countries, Europe, Japan, the US, less and less of their graduates are going into science and engineering. And yet, if you look at the salaries and the job needs in those areas, they're very, very strong. And so you have very unusual things like computer science departments, the top computer science departments in the United States, many of them are over 50% foreign born. The UC Berkeley computer science department, which is super top notch, 77% foreign born. And then you get this irony, which is that if you go to hire those people, they can't get H-1B cards. So they've gotten the world's best education. And wherever they work, companies like Microsoft create like 5 jobs around each of those engineers, of people doing testing, user design. But we do it wherever we can get the engineers. And so to the degree that they have to go back to India or China, then that forces those other skill sets to be developed in those countries. So definitely there's this, as you said, there's an attrition in terms of interest in math and science that starts in high school. The first year of college, it drops off a lot. At the end of college, it drops off a lot. We're just, even as people come, say, to Microsoft, and they start as an engineer, more of the women then move into marketing and general management type roles than the males do. And so we just have this incredible attrition, both in terms of the absolute numbers and in terms of women and minorities. And so, by the time you take an engineer who's been working for 10 years, that's a very male, non-minority, it's a very Asian and Caucasian percentage that's doing that. How we can make math and science less daunting, how we can make the image of those careers a little bit different. I think there is good work that's going on with that. Some of the way that science is taught in high school, I have a new online thing on behind it's called Big History that teaches the sciences in somewhat different ways. I know some universities have combined a number of the science courses, but we really need to seek out best practices on that, because those jobs, more than other jobs, people can say I'm biased, but more than other jobs, those do tend to drive your economic future. And so it's ironic that we're not driving those things. The fastest growing major in the US is physical education. And historically, the US put people into the new fields, what was big and important. And now, either in terms of how much we're educating our people or having people in the cutting edge fields, either of those indicators are a bit scary in terms of us relative to Asian countries.
Thank you. This is now, I'm going to ask the last question because I've been charged with keeping control of the schedule, and I want to take a little bit of a shift from the conversation. Obviously, educational attainment is a high priority for ours, but land-grant universities are also deeply involved in addressing these global challenges that the Gates Foundation is. And in fact, we think of this 21st century land-grant model as organizing around, in some ways, addressing food security and opportunities for economic opportunities for women, public health. So could you tell us, just spend a few minutes talking about some of the kind of most exciting opportunities that you see for America's universities to be engaged in the kind of work that drives you around the globe?
Yeah, I think universities are doing a far better job making their students aware of conditions around the world. You know, when I almost graduated from Harvard, I had no sense of living conditions around the world. Today, universities have lots of courses. You know, they attempt to get students out there, they bring in the information. So I think that awareness alone is an extremely valuable thing. I know when the foundation goes out to look for work on better seeds, to get rid of crop disease, to design new vaccines, to build better toilets, it really reinforces that U.S. universities are at the cutting edge. You know, something about 70% of our grants where, if anything, we try to go to institutions in the developing countries themselves. If we had two equally meritorious scientific research proposals, we would favor the poor country where the problem actually is in that location. And yet, for most of what we do, it ends up being the lead university will be a U.S.-based institution. Now, they're doing a really good job partnering with institutions in these other countries to build up their capacity, to run the trials, and there's, I think, some secondary benefits that come from that. One thing even though we're talking about this very tough challenge of these budgets, I do want to share with you my optimism for the state of innovation. You know, the fact that other universities around the world are going to participate in innovation, that's actually a good thing. But just in the U.S. sense alone, the speed of innovation, whether it's in materials science, understanding chemistry at this basic digital level, energy type advances across the board, understanding how to make new vaccines, the immune system, a lot of that pushed through by trying to understand diseases like AIDS. Agriculture, I mean, it is so exciting. Thank goodness that plants have the same genetics as humans, because so much money, billions and billions, were spent to create sequencing tools, genetic understanding, and now the agricultural field essentially gets that as a windfall. And so the deep understanding of plant disease, plant productivity, I mean, this is the golden age of innovation. And, great professors, grad students at your institutions are doing the things that allow our foundation to be very optimistic about improving life in the countries, the poor countries, whether it's childhood deaths that are now down to 8 million a year. I can see a path to get that to 4 million and get that down to 2 million. Malnutrition, will we have enough food to feed the planet? I think innovation, absolutely, even despite the headwinds of climate and certain limited resources, I think we'll be able to meet that challenge. So, it's almost a paradox that the importance of the work and the innovation is stronger than ever at a time when scaling it up and making it broadly accessible is a tough challenge.
Absolutely right, and that's a challenge I think that we'll accept, and we look forward to working with you and the Gates Foundation. Thank you for being here to help us recognize and celebrate this important event in the history of our country and of higher education. Thank you for challenging us today, and thanks for your partnership with the Gates Foundation for American Public Higher Education. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. It now, as my final act on the stage, gives me great pleasure to introduce my friend and...
We are still by far, when it comes to research, teaching, and learning at top universities, the very best in the world. However, two major trends in higher education are guiding us down a path that may lead us away from the historical commitment to equity and opportunity. First, there's the financial constraints. In the past generation, state funding per full-time student has fallen by 25%. I don't need to tell you that. This is something that you face every day. The fiscal crisis has accelerated this trend. In just the past 5 years, for example, my home state of Washington has cut funding for higher education by 17%. As a result of this disinvestment and the steadily rising costs of running your institutions, the financial burden of college has been shifting to students. They now pay an average of $45,000 out of pocket for 4 years of public school. Now, federal money has helped bridge the gap for a while. The federal spending on higher education has gone up quite a bit, one of the faster growing items in the budget. The stimulus package helped the state budgets for a couple of years, but now those dollars have largely come to an end. The Pell program alone more than doubled in the past decade. But unfortunately, it's unlikely to continue that path. It's not on a sustainable trend. In fact, if we look out to 2014, there's an $8 billion funding gap just for the Pell program alone. So that's one trend that's troubling. A second trend that's of our foundation, I want to thank you for that. Today, though, I want to focus on the one thing you do that's even more important than that research, and that's providing great education to almost 5 million students. The Morrill Act created a system of public colleges to, quote, promote the liberal and practical education of the industrial classes. There were two breakthrough ideas contained in that single sentence. First, that higher education should be both liberal and practical, that it should address society's needs, and second, that all people should have the opportunity to obtain it. These two ideas amounted to a brand new vision for higher education, based on the conviction that a bigger and more diverse group of well-educated people would be an asset to our democracy and a boon to our economy. This vision powered America's economic dynamism for more than a century. Your graduates helped build a prosperous country. Recently, though, education advocates have been looking at the international competitors. And what we see there is that other countries have seen what the U.S. did well, that we built a system of great colleges. And in many respects, they are copying what we did. And in some respects, on areas like completion rate, some of those countries are doing even better than we've done. And so what that says to me is that we need to double down. We need to take this phenomenal asset that's benefited the world and make it even better. There should be no doubt about our starting point. Troubling is the sort of trap of moving towards higher and higher status or exclusivity. When U.S. News rankings come out, they judge you essentially on how selective you are, more by the inputs coming into the institution. They look at credentialed faculty, the amount you spend on various things, and sort of subjective impressions of academic reputation. And so these measures are standing in the way of having real measures of value added, real measures of effectiveness that we really need to root out what best practices are and continue to benefit from the best work that all of you do. I understand these perverse incentives are hard hard to get around. But in a sense, it's a type of zero-sum competition in exclusivity. One symptom of this we see is that acceptance rates at many flagship universities now hover at around 50%. And that doesn't count a large number of students who don't even bother applying because they know that the bar for admission has continued to go up and up. And so in short, fewer people of those who want to attend your universities are getting in, and those who do get in are paying more. And so this is a big challenge. It can't continue if we all have a goal of fulfilling that mission of providing broad education. And so we have to look at how we can reverse both spirals. We have to let in as many people as can be successfully educated, and they have to get that education at the lowest possible.
The human condition. We could not have a more committed and passionate ally in these pursuits. I know all of us respect and admire greatly what Bill Gates has devoted his wealth and his life to, and we're delighted to welcome him to this celebration. Join me in welcoming Bill Gates.
Well, thank you, President Milken. I'm grateful for your invitation to address the APLU on this special day. And to express my gratitude, I brought this bag with me. Now, this bag is actually helping lift 10 million people out of poverty. Farmers in Central and West Africa grow black-eyed peas. They're hardy, they're protein-rich, but unfortunately, tiny pests called weevils destroy half the crop after it's harvested during the time it's stored. Or they did until researchers at Purdue University developed this 3-layered polyethylene and nylon bag. It costs less than $2, and it keeps out the weevils, and it increases poor farm families' incomes by over 25%. And so that bag is a good example of one of the many partnerships our foundation has with APLU members across the country. American public colleges and universities do the finest research in the world. You create knowledge not just for its own sake, but to improve people's lives. And on behalf of
Gates, he is scheduled to speak at this event recognizing the importance of federal funding for colleges and universities.
We were talking about who should be the keynote speaker at the 150th anniversary celebration of the Morrill Act. We immediately agreed on a first choice, Bill Gates, someone who would not only help us recognize and celebrate the last 150 years, but challenge us and work with us in the decades ahead. Together with his wife, Bill co-chairs the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which works to expand opportunities for people around the world. Their foundation is a leader in efforts to improve global health, alleviate poverty, and expand opportunities for women, and with particular significance today, increase access to and success in education. Their efforts, which span the globe, are unprecedented and truly exciting. The work of the Gates Foundation is built on a simple premise, that all lives have equal value. That powerful statement resonates with all of us. And it is rooted in the same philosophy as the act we're celebrating today, which has extended educational and economic opportunity to millions. The Gates Foundation is involved in many of the same endeavors that today's land-grant universities are. In particular, improving educational outcomes, expanding access across our country, but also in addressing some of the grand challenges globally, such as eradicating disease, ensuring food security, and developing new sources of sustainable energy. Through not only its funding, but also its thoughtful approach to philanthropy, the Gates Foundation is a valued partner of American universities and others committed to improving